For your needle book, you are going to need the pattern pieces, which can be found at the back of the instruction booklet that is linked below. You are going to need two contrasting fabrics, or it could be the same. One is for the outer, one is for the lining. You're going to need a piece of felt so that you can put your needles into this and it will hold it into position once it's made. We're going to use a piece of leftover wadding today, but you could equally use fusible fleece if you have an offcut of that. I'm going to need a ruler and a fabric pen. You could equally use fabric chalk. I love the friction pens because these disappear with heat, but anything along those lines would be great. A point turner or a chopstick is super useful for making those angular corners once you turn it through. I'm going to use my craft scissors to cut out the pattern piece. I'm going to use my fabric scissors to cut out the fabric, so that keeps those sharp. I'm going to use embroidery scissors to cut the loose threads when I'm sewing. You're going to need thread that coordinates with your fabric because you will see it from the outside, some pins, and if you've got them, some sewing clips. I find them useful, but you don't need them. An iron and an ironing board is also going to be essential. Firstly, use your craft scissors to cut out your pattern piece. So rest the bottom blade against your table or ironing board, wherever you are cutting. Open those blades wide, rest the bottom blade against the table, and that will help you get a really nice clean cut. So this pattern piece is the smaller one, which will be for the insert. So ideally a piece of felt. You can pick up felt fairly cheaply from Hobbycraft and places like that. And then your second piece, you are going to be cutting 3 fabrics using this particular pattern piece. One will be your outer fabric, one will be your lining fabric, which could be the same if you wish, and one will be the wadding. We're going to quilt a piece of fabric first to get a nice padded effect for our needle case. And the lines on this pattern piece are going to come in useful as well. So once you've got your 2 pattern pieces cut, you're ready to cut your fabrics. So to recap, using the larger piece, I have my outer, my lining and my wadding. From the smaller piece, I have my piece of felt. We're now going to prepare our fabric in preparation to quilt. So with our outer fabric, the fabric that you're having on the outside of your needle case, you want to put that right side down. So the right side of the fabric is the one you'd like to look at. The wrong side of the fabric is the back of the fabric. So we're putting our fabric right side down, and then we're going to position our wadding directly over the top. Now to quilt this, what we're going to do is use our pattern piece to draw some lines on here, and then we're going to be sewing down these lines in turn. Now when sewing, I'll give you some tips as to how to get this so it doesn't pucker up or gather together too much. But either use a ruler, or I'm going to use this pattern piece as my guideline. I'm just going to add some marks at the top of where those quilting guidelines will be. You could have a few less if you wanted to. Because it's quite small, I liked to have a few more to make sure that it looked consistent. I'm actually leaving the middle line out because that's going to be the fold when we fold our needle book together at the end. So I can now move that out of the way and use those dots to draw some lines. Now sometimes the wadding can be a bit tricky to draw onto. So you could draw on the right side of your fabric instead if you like. Because I'm using friction pen, I'd prefer to do it on the back, so on the wadding in this case. But just be aware that should you need to, oh, there's the middle, you don't need to do it on the back. So work your way across, join up those dots and draw yourself a guideline for you to use when sewing. And then what I'm going to do is pop some pins in between those guidelines so that they don't interfere with my sewing. Stagger them a little bit. My pins are quite long, so I'm just going to use potentially one. If yours are smaller, then use two. You really want this to stay secure while you're sewing. And as I've said before, you can't ever overpin, really. At the sewing machine, I'm going to start from, that would be my centre line. I'm going to start from the line next to the centre and then work my way outwards. I'm then going to do the same from the other side, and that ensures that your fabric is constantly being kind of pushed outwards, if anything, and nothing ends up kind of scrumpled up in the middle. So it's always better to work from your middle and work your way out. So over at the machine, I will start at this line and I'm just going to sew from top to bottom. I want to get as close to the edges as possible, but at this stage I don't need to reverse my stitches at the start and at the end, because provided I've gone right to the edges, I should be able to secure those stitches in another layer of stitching later. Before I start sewing, I like to make sure that the tension on my machine is correct, and by that I mean that my top thread and my bottom thread are talking to each other nicely. So with an offcut of fabric, I just fold that in half to represent the two layers that will be going through the machine. I slide that under, trap my fabric and start sewing. Once done, take it out and then have a look at your stitches. You are aiming for stitches that look consistent on the front and that you can see the stitches. It's not just a line with some bumps in it, and the back should look exactly the same. If everything is well, you can start to stitch. So my threads I'm tucking underneath my presser foot and out of the back. Need to make sure you've got a nice tail, otherwise your machine will unthread. Remember, we said we're going to start from the line next to the center. We're going right from the edge. So I'm trapping that in place. I have got a medium length stitch. So for those of you with numbers, mine's on a number 3, but you just want something that is medium in length, not too short because you're going through wadding, but not too long either. When you're ready, you can sew from the top to the bottom. You're going right along that stitch line that you created with your friction pen or similar. Sewing right off the end, pull my thread out, snip close to the fabric on both ends. Make sure your tail of thread goes underneath and out the back, ready for your next line of stitches. So we're going back under, lining up. I'm working my way outwards. I'm going from top to bottom. If my pins were in the way, I would stop, take the pin out as I sewed, and then carry on. Keep following this process until you've made your way out to the edge, and then start from the next line from the center and work your way out again. We're now ready to piece together our needle case ready to sew. So here is our quilted piece. If you have used a fabric marker or some chalk on this side, then obviously you need to remove that now. Sponge it down, or if it's friction pen, you could give it a quick iron to get rid of the pen marks. I prefer to do it on the back, so I don't need to worry about that step. Turn your needle case round, so you've now got the right side facing upwards, and then your lining piece is going to go right side down. So this blue fabric is actually the same front and back. But if it weren't, if it were a pattern piece of fabric, I would need this to be the right side, and that would go against the right side of this fabric. So all the nice sides were hidden inside, and I'm looking at the back of my fabric now. When we're sewing, we're going to be leaving a gap at the top here. So to mark the gap and make it different from where I am going to pin, I'm going to use 2 clips. If you haven't got clips, you could use your fabric marker to just make 2 little marks, or sometimes I use a double pin. I put 2 pins super close next to each other, and that means that's where I need to start and stop. The rest of the project just gets pinned together. As you go, be mindful of whether any of your fabrics are sticking out, because you want these pieces of fabric to be exactly the same size to make your life easier when you are sewing your project together. So I'm just going to pop some pins in, keep all of those layers together and in place. One more at the top here. Then just have a quick flip over, make sure that everything's okay, nothing's sticking out hugely. If it's just by a tiny amount, you can leave that, but if something is sticking out quite significantly, you need to trim that down and make it all the same size now. Over at the machine, I have my tail of threads out the back. I'm sliding my project in and I'm starting. This clip is going to go behind, this clip is where I'm going to start. So I'm just going to put my finger where that clip would be, slide this into position, and I'd like a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So my fabric sticks out ever so slightly to the edge. I'm going to reverse for a few stitches. So on my machine, I press and hold the reverse button. Some of you might have a lever that you need to press down and hold quite firmly while you go backwards, and then you can let it go to go forwards again. So either way, press and hold. Your machine needs to go backwards for 1 or 2 stitches, and then you're going to go forwards. Now keep an eye on when I get near to the corner, and I'll give you some tips. So I'm guiding my fabric with my hand. I've stopped so I can slide my pin out as I sew. And then when I get approximately 1 centimetre from the edge of the fabric here, I'm going to put my needle down. So at the moment my needle is up in the air. I'm going to use the wheel at the side of my machine and I'm going to wind that towards me. My needle is now down, so I can lift, spin, trap and carry on sewing. Now, if I feel I've not gone far enough, or if I feel like I've overshot and gone too far, I can adjust, lift, spin, trap, go back to where you were. So I might want to go 1 stitch closer to the edge, or I might have needed to go 1 stitch backwards. Either way, your needle needs to be down at the corner, lift, spin, trap, and sew. Stop when you reach a pin, slide it out, and continue sewing. So again at the corner, I'm going to put my needle down, lift, spin, trap, remove that pin while I'm there, and sew. So I'm going to go around all the edges until I reach the clip near the gap. As I'm nearly back at the clip again, I'm going to sew towards the clip, remove the clip before it becomes a problem, go a bit further forwards, and then I need to reverse for a few stitches. So I'm going to press and hold and reverse for 2 or 3 stitches going back. That's going to secure my stitches. Then I lift my presser foot, pull my project out to the side, leaving a tail, and cut those 2 threads, top and bottom, close to the project. Do the same with the ends where you started, and we'll carry on. At these 4 corner points, there is a lot of fabric on the outside that needs to squeeze into this section once it's turned the right way through. So we're going to remove some of that fabric from each corner. So I do this by just trimming diagonally across, making sure that I don't cut through my stitching. I don't want a hole, I just want to remove the bulk of the fabric that's there. That will make your corners so much neater when you turn this through the right way. Once that's done, you're going to find where your gap was left, and you are going to open up the gap and push your project through that hole that you have left. So once it's gone through, you're going to start easing it out and then find those corners. Now at the moment it's not looking very impressive, so what we need to do is make sure that we've gone right to those corner points, giving it a gentle massage, trying to get those corners out. And once you're nearly there, I like to use either a point turner or a chopstick, or a blunt pencil would do. And then starting from the inside, I go through the gap that has been created, and I just nudge those corners out. So I want them to be a nice square corner without actually me poking through the gap. So I'm just easing it gently, all 4 corners, to make those corners a little bit more square. So it's already looking much better, and we're nearly ready to top stitch. We're now going to be top stitching around the outside of our pattern. So what I would like you to do is kind of make sure you have finger pressed these sides down to make sure that you can't see much of the pink from the back and you can't see much of the blue from the front. Give it a good press, but particular attention needs to be paid where we have the gap. So at the gap here, we have got some loose fabric inside. So we tuck the seam allowance inside by 1 centimetre, and we give that a good finger press. Make sure the top bit, which is springier, gets done as well. Finger press it so that your fingers don't go near the iron when we're on our next step. And then while it's there, just give that a good press as well. And that's going to make your top stitching so much easier when you come to it. To remind me that this is where the gap is, I'm just going to pop a clip there, make sure it hasn't made my fabric dip or anything. So that's to remind me when I'm top stitching, I definitely need to be sewing close to this edge when I reach this section. To top stitch at the machine, it doesn't matter where you start, but I would start somewhere in the middle of a line, or an edge I should say, and rather than using a 1 centimetre seam allowance, which we did before, we're actually going to use half of that. So maybe ½ centimetre in from the edge. You're going to start sewing down. Now, because you are closer to the edge than you were previously, it means that your gap is going to get sealed as you go past it. So you're going to start sewing. Don't need to reverse to begin with. You're going to go all the way around the outside, top stitching close to the edge. When you get back to where you started, you overlap those first stitches by a couple of stitches and then reverse for a couple of stitches to secure the end. So top stitch around all 4 edges, making sure to overlap when you reach where you started and reverse where you finish as well. To complete your needle book, we're now going to position our felt inside and then attach it using the sewing machine. So I have my needle case with the lining facing upwards, and I'm just going to fold that in half and iron it into position. So making sure you keep your fingers away from the iron. You might want to press down hard because it's got lots of layers to go through, so those sections at the side will be a little bit stubborn. And then you're going to do exactly the same for your felt piece. So carefully fold it in half, finger press so you've got the right position. Help stay there while you then position your iron. Now those folds are going to help you position this felt in the right place. So sit the felt piece on top of the fold that you have created for the needle book. If you feel that your piece of felt needs trimming down slightly, if you can see it from the outside, now would be a good time to do it. This looks fine. So I'm just going to pop 2 pins in place so that this doesn't move when I take it over to the machine. And then I'm going to sew this in place. So I'm going to reverse. I'm going to start about 1 centimetre down from the top, reverse up to the edge, sew down to the bottom and reverse to finish. Your needle book will then be done. So I'm positioning my needle over that folded edge about 1 centimetre down from the top and trap my fabric. I'm then going to reverse up towards the top and then sew down to the bottom. And when I've reached the bottom, I'm going to reverse stitch for a couple of stitches to secure. Remove from the machine and snip your threads. One needle case ready for action. I like to keep needles and some pins in mine ready for when I'm doing some embroidery in my house or when I'm out and about with lessons for my children. While they're doing their lesson, I like to get on with some crafting. I hope you've enjoyed making this free project. There are other free projects on my website. Just go to oodlesofcraft.com and at the top of the page you'll see a link to freebies. All of my patterns have a set of instructions with pictures and a video to go alongside it here on YouTube. Happy creating! Subscribe and follow to get notified of any new ones in the future.